Alright, so we're going to attempt to do something a little different here. I'm actually going to be doing mostly screen capture and attempting to record and potentially intermix live video with the screen capture. So we will see how this turns out. Um, so, the first thing that you will need to do is go to the Google Drive link that Folger Tech provides and download the firmware. Now, I did this the other day when John posted the firmware after I had asked about it. And looking at the configuration and comparing it with the Marlin configuration that's out there, which is 1.1.9, it turns out all he had done was uploaded the FT-5 firmware 1.1.2 that he had. So that was the stopgap measure that he gave me the other day. As of, it looks like last night or this morning, he has actually uploaded the Marlin, so at least for the dual extruder here, which was the only thing that was uploaded before, this is based on 1.1.9. And if we go back and we look at the single extruder, I would assume it's the same. Now, again, I'm working with the dual extruder, and so if I compare these folders now between the original, the boards file is showing a difference. For some reason, it looks like he must have gone in probably just to copy out the board MKS Gen 1.3 because that's the board we're using. And in that, he managed, looks like the file changed for some reason. But there's nothing important there. The big difference, and this is what I was going to have to configure on my own without this, is the configuration file. And so this is what tells the firmware build everything you need to know. So John put his name in, and it's a version 0.1. So you know, no confidence that this won't change, obviously. So that's just informational. If we scroll down to the first important changes, we see that the motherboard, this is where I was talking about the MKS Gen 1.3, and then there's a place to put a custom machine name. In this case, he's calling it the FT-6 version 0.1. The next thing which applies to this machine is 2 extruders and the nominal filament diameter of 1.75. And finally, the fact, this is the problem that I have with my dual extruder, is it's only a single nozzle when I was expecting 2 nozzles. So if I come up with a way to replace and put 2 nozzles on here, I'd have to come in and start changing this. So this is a Cyclops style extruder. Now we scroll down to the next change, and what we see is he's turning on the temperature sensor for the bed here. So you've got a temperature sensor for the bed, 1. And this would have been nice if the comment was changed to actually reflect that this is not an Ultimaker nozzle. These are intended to just be uncommented if you're using an Ultimaker or Maker Gear or whatever. He's put in terms that presumably come from the nozzle manufacturer for the nozzle being used, but it's not an Ultimaker nozzle, I don't believe. Certainly it's not the default settings. So if somebody were to pick this up, and think that these were Ultimaker settings for some reason, then they'd have a problem. But just be good to get a comment that these are changed. Next, we see that by default there are pull-ups on the end stops. Apparently this is being disabled, and presumably that means that he's got pull-ups on each of those circuit boards. And then they're defining, so end stop pull up for the Zmax, Zmin, and Zmin probe. Then the last thing in here is that all the end stops are inverting, so that's non-standard compared to the typical that they say, which would be everything is non-inverting, so it's false. Now, this one, we'll see what happens. This is presumably related to the bed sensor, and it's this end stop noise filter. And enable this option if end stops falsely trigger due to noise. And it says enabling this feature means adds an error of plus or minus 0.2 millimeters. So homing will end up at a slightly different position on each G28. Okay, that is, to me, is going to be unacceptable. So if that really happens, this is not going to be a very good printer. Because every time you run it, you're going to get a different home position, and you're going to end up getting, especially on the bed, where it's critical, you're going to have big gaps or be too close, so you're going to have sticking problems and everything else. So if this really occurs and this is necessary, that's not a good situation. So that bothers me to see that turned on. Then we have default axis steps per unit, 720 and 95, considerably smaller than the defaults that were in there. Max feed rate gets turned down quite a bit. Now, that might be okay if it's the fact that this thing has a coarse step size, although that's an awfully coarse step size, which may mean your resolution suffers. So if the steps per unit is low, that means you've got low resolution. Default max feed rate, I don't know. Well, it's in millimeters per second, so this is saying, we're reducing it from 300 to 200. And default max acceleration is being reduced by half. So basically, compared to the defaults, this is a slow printer. I have no idea how this compares to something like my Robo 3D, so I can't really judge that. And again, default acceleration, retraction, etc. This is all on the drive, the extruder. You can see again these numbers are being reduced. Finally, fixed mounted probe. This is saying that we have a bed probe that does not need to be deployed. So this inductive probe. So that's fine. That makes sense. We're inverting the E0 direction. So this is because we have the two extruders, E0 and E1, our two Bowdens. One goes clockwise and one goes counterclockwise from the way they're installed. So if we look up here, you'll recall that the Bowdens are actually reversed, one to the other. And so one of these has to go clockwise, the other goes counterclockwise. The problem is, of course, that in the installation, there is no documentation about, because there was no cables provided for one, but there's no documentation about which of those two is 0 and 1. So they're either both going to run backwards or they're both going to run correctly. But this is what fixes that. And basically, if they run the wrong direction, then you just swap the two drives and that will fix them both. Then we get into the bed size. So we have an X bed size of 720 and a Y bed size of 350. Again, these are the very edge of the bed, as you saw in the assembly video with the screw heads. We're not going to be able to meet that without some modifications. And then the Z maximum position is set to 400. So that's the defined limits within the firmware. Doesn't really mean anything physically other than that's what the firmware is going to expect it to be able to do. And finally, this, and I'm going to have to research a little more to find out for sure, because this says RepRap discount full graphic smart controller. Well, I didn't buy the discount controller. I bought the larger screen touchscreen. So presumably, I don't know if that means there's a different setting for that or not. You can see there's quite a few defines through here. So I'll have to learn a little more about that and attempt again to see if we can contact Folger Tech to confirm whether or not that needs to change depending on which thing you have plugged into the front panel. But that's the firmware. Okay, so we see the changes. There's nothing else. So now currently it is the latest version of the firmware from Marlin. The other thing you're going to need, and actually I would go to the Marlin website, and I'm not sure if I've got it up here. Yeah. So if you go here, you've got a thing on configuring as well as a section on installation. So you download the release. Well, you'll get that from Folger Tech. But you need to build and install. And there are multiple ways. Since I'm used to dealing with the Arduino, that's what I'm using. So if you just follow that link, it will take you to the Arduino site. And so you download the Arduino IDE. When it comes up with a little test program, sample blank thing. Navigate to the Marlin folder from Folger Tech, and there's an INO file. That's the default Arduino file type. And if you load that actually loads this entire project for the firmware. And so if I came through here, you can see this should be the configuration file we were just looking through. So if I scroll down through it, if I've got the thing selected, we'll see John Folger version 0.1 Folger Tech. So this is the project, and what we have to do is download this into the printer. Now, when I plug in the USB cable, which it turns out will just barely reach to my front panel, I just won't be able to reach to the back panel without a installation. Now the printer is not powered on, but this should work without that. And before I plug it in, let me show you over here in the device manager. You'll see now my Robo is turned off, but you'll see in there I've got an Arduino Mega 2560 COM4. So that's my Arduino on my Robo 3D. And so when I plug this in, I should hear and see an installation of another USB serial port. It does not come up saying that it's an Arduino, which potentially means that that's not an embedded, and it may not actually talk to the chip directly until I power up the printer. But we'll give it a shot and see. So it came up and it set it up as COM3. And so the first thing that I will do is come in here and set up the port to be COM3. I'm going to see what happens if I tell it to upload. So it's compiling the sketch. Okay, so it's an Arduino Mega. So tools. That appears to be actually a smart thing from the setup. So the other thing that you have to set up is you have to change the board to an Arduino Mega. There we go. And now we hit the upload button, and it's going to build the entire sketch. Uh-oh, no such file or directory. All right, well, let me see what's missing there, and we will come back. So it looks like the thing that it is complaining about not having for the Marlin firmware is a library for monochrome TFTs and OLEDs. So this would actually correspond to probably that last setting that was turned on to talk to the display. Manage libraries. Let's see if it actually knows it's there. Let's just do it that way. All right, so instead we're installing that U8G2 from the, there's actually several of them, so I'm going to go ahead and install all these. That's the one I actually installed. We're not using an Adafruit, so I don't think we need that. Although, let's install it anyway. All right. Once more into the breach, dear friends. So it's got to rebuild everything because we changed some things. But now hopefully it will find the correct library. All right. So looks good. Looks like we compiled. It looks like it's talking. It's at least showing what it thinks it's talking to. It says uploading. Done uploading. So at this point, we now have firmware in our board. So if I power this on and try to talk to it with the appropriate software, I should be able to actually do something. So we're in the Repetier setup and we're selecting COM3, which is the port that came up for our Arduino, our new one, the USB serial port here. This, remember, is my Robo 3D. So, COM3 and the baud rate, the default is 25,000. Or is that 250,000 actually? Can't count the number of zeros there. And so if I look in the file, that is the default baud rate in the firmware. We're going to have it auto-detect as much as possible. Really, all I want to do right now is confirm that I can connect to it, I can talk to it, and ideally tell it to move something. So we are going to hit OK there. We're not setting up any information about the printer or anything else. We're just going to hit this connect button and see what happens. And it's acting like it's connected. Now, what I want to do is go to manual control. And currently, I don't have, which beds did I disconnect? I think I've got, or which motors, I should say, did I disconnect? So I still have my X-axis disconnected over here, but I believe both the Y and the Z-axis are powered up currently. So we're going to come over here and So saying XY. Now, I've actually not used Repetier before, so okay. Depends on where you click as to how far it's going to move. I don't want to move very far. So let us try moving. I'm going to assume that this is Y. Okay, so that's positive. And let's try moving it 50 millimeters. All right. Minus 50 millimeters. There you go. Look at that. Probably zoom in here a little bit. Of course, now this will probably just become very jumpy for you, but okay, so that's working. Do we think the bed will move? Let's take Z up a millimeter and see if it moves in the right direction. That's actually Z. That makes sense. That Z up is actually down for the bed because we're not moving the extruder, we're moving the bed. So if I come here and do minus 10 millimeters, that should move it up a centimeter. It was actually pretty fast. That did not seem like that was a centimeter, though. And now it doesn't want to move. And that sensor light seems pretty bright. I wonder if it thinks it's actually touching the bed. Let's see if this will still move. So that still works. But something has faulted and our bed will not move now. That may be our noise indicator and whatever else. So we've got a problem on the Z-axis. We'll have to figure that out. I'm going to go ahead and plug in the X-axis, and we will see whether or not that moves with the direction we think it should. Now the problem, as I've indicated here, I'm going to go ahead and power the printer off. Now communication should still continue because the Arduino is there. But what we don't know is we don't know for sure which one of these is supposed to go to which plug. And this is going to control, one of these goes one way, one of these goes the other. So we're going to plug them in one way, and if positive seems to be negative, we will reverse it. And I don't know what you guys are seeing, sorry. You're just going to have to listen to me. I'll put a pretty picture up or something. Okay, our stepper motors are now plugged in one way. And so that has the front stepper motor farthest from the connector. So this is a kind of important piece of information that is just not included in any of the documentation. And so if I tell it to move forward a millimeter, guess what? It's not moving at all. Is this still working? Oh, of course it's not moving. I turned the power off. All right. So we must turn the power back on. And as you will see, I've got the front one connected to the front, the farthest connection from the feed, and the back motor for the X-axis connected in the center. and we will see if that is correct or not. And now let's tell it to move forward by 1 millimeter. And that's going to backwards. Right? We want negative to be that direction. That's supposed to be negative 50. And we faulted. Maybe that's because that's probably thinks it's at 0. Nope, it won't go in either direction. Let's see if the Z will move. So we now have two drivers that have either failed on us, or something. So, not a very auspicious start. We may have popped two drivers off the board. So, I'm going to do a little bit of diagnostic, and we will see what I discover. So one thing I can show you here is the two LEDs on this are actually your limit indicators. So when you hit the limit, those LEDs go off. So that's what they're doing with that. I don't know if that means we are on the limit here because it's showing up red. I come back over here. Okay, it gets a little brighter. Again, oops. There's the focus. For some reason, it does not want to focus on that unless I actually manually tell it to. So, I still don't know if that works or not. Okay, so we know we need to swap the X's, so I'm going to power off and I'm going to swap those, and we'll take another stab at this and see what happens. Alright, so we've now swapped. We've got the front motor is going to the center, and we've got the back motor going to the far end. That should make them now run in the correct direction. And power this back up, and we will see if anything will move. And I think I'm going to disconnect and reconnect. And hey, it moved. And it moved in the right direction. Now, do we trust the home sensor? Let's give it a shot. So this is the x-axis. That appears to have worked. I'm not sure what the buzzing was initially, though. Unless that was lowering the bed. I wasn't watching the bed. And I probably wasn't giving y'all a good view on the video either. So let's bring the x-axis out. And let's hit the home. And it homed. Let's see if we trust doing a home on the y-axis. We believe the y-axis is moving in the right direction. That worked. Now, what I don't trust doing, and I don't know that it's going to let me go positive here. I think what's happening is I'm at some sort of an internal limit about how far. Well, no. According to, maybe this is a limit actually in the firmware, that it thinks where it starts, it's not allowed to go there. But now the Z is no longer working. X still runs. Now, and of course, Y should still run. Sorry. So X and Y are still working. One thing I wanted to look at. Okay, that fan is running. Come on, autofocus. So that fan is running. And that fan is currently not running. And if I come over here and I look at this, this controls the fan speed. Let's turn that on. So now is that fan running? Lo and behold, my controlled fan, there we are. Now that fan is spinning. So that's my little cooler, which should be blowing down here. Now, the only thing I haven't done is I haven't tried turning on the bed yet, or the extruder. And I'm not quite ready to do that yet. That will be something to do, but for the moment, we're going to leave those cold. And let's try slowing our fan down and see. So now we're about 30%. Let's see if we can tell. It's still running. Still a nice little bit of air, but it's a very small amount. Wonder how slow we can go. We're at 9%. You can hear the PWM, and you can see that is barely turning now. Check that out. Oops, stalled. So 10% is a little slow. So let's give it 20%. 20% is probably reasonable. Nope, not enough to get it started. We don't want to burn our fan up. Let's get it started, and then we can try slowing it down. So now we're about 25. And you can definitely tell it's going slow, but it seems to be continuing. So that's what we want. Very nice. All right. Now, what I don't know, and I wish there was an indicator on here, I really want an indicator that tells me if I'm on a limit or not, because I do not want to run this bed into something. The fact that it moves, let's try this. Let's just run a Z home. Okay, Z home is running. All right, that seemed to work. I don't know how close it's got to get, though. Okay, let us try to get an idea. Well, that doesn't look bad, so I don't know on the video, you probably weren't seeing anything I was doing. But I was basically putting a screwdriver in front of the sensor and getting an idea of how far away I could get. So, let's go ahead and have this thing try to home. And so here comes the bed. And I am going to get over here ready for an emergency stop. So, emergency stop. Don't move the mouse. It's going to take a little while. The good news is this should mean if I get all of this tested, then tomorrow, as soon as I get home from work and open my box from Amazon, and by the way, sorry for the jumpy video. Part of this is me jumping, part of this is that my camera's stabilization seems to be going out. So here we come, here we come. Try to get that there. Still got a ways to go. What I don't know though is, are we going to hit it? Whoa. And I just hit the emergency stop because that got far too close. So that's actually in contact with the tip. So I am going to attempt to adjust this sensor down. Alright, so let's see what happens as I attempt to loosen these screws. What I need to do is come up with a small spacer. I need like a one of my business cards that of course I had sitting around here earlier. Alright, so having a complete lack of guidance, I'm going to set that for our sensor and we will see how much of a gap we end up with now when we home. And I see that this fell over completely, so you haven't been watching any of that. Alright. Now, like I say, we are basically with the bed hitting the tip, but the sensor should now be triggered. So we are going to raise the Z. And now the sensor just went off. Let me see if I can hold that right about there. And now we will try a Z home. Okay, that's what it thinks is home. Now what I don't know is there an software offset. So that's a little bit too much of a gap at the tip. But I'm hoping, not horrible. The question is, can I just do a Z offset in the software to say, you know, after you home, step it down a certain amount. That would be what I hope is possible with this. Because if I got to set that exactly perfect, that's going to be a pain in the butt. But the point is, at the moment, it's protecting the tip. So now, if I just did a generic home, it should home everything. So it's going to lower the bed. That's good. It's homing X. It's homing Y. And now it's homing Z. And boom. Well, what do you know? We now have a printer that will home itself. Alright, so this is where I stopped this evening, because without being able to run the two extruders, there's no point. I'm not going to heat up the hot end or the bed or anything. I will do that tomorrow when I can actually run some filament into it. So, thank you very much, everyone, and check back in a little while.